of significant government moves in the past week. The federal Liberals walked back the digital services tax to get the U.S. to resume trade negotiations. And before that, the Prime Minister committed to 5% of GDP spending on defense, as agreed by NATO member nations. Here to offer his insight on all of this is former Defense Minister Peter MacKay, who joins us from Pictou County. Good to see you, Peter.
Thanks, Todd. Always a pleasure.
A lot to digest. Let's begin with the tax on big tech. This was going to be on Apple and Meta and the like. Just 48 hours ago, the minister was pretty insistent that this would be implemented. Now it's dropped. What do you read into that?
Well, it is a capitulation. There's no question. Apparently, there was discussions between the president and our prime minister, and it's a complete swallowing whole of what was said about the revenues that would be generated, which, Todd, I mean, they were significant. They were $2 billion that were essentially to be collected as back tax, and then going forward, $7 billion. So this is a government that has made massive spending promises on a whole range of things, including defense and promises to the provinces. It's looking increasingly like a challenge for them in terms of keeping those commitments. Not to mention the fact that we haven't seen a budget, and we won't see a budget until the fall. So backing off on this particular initiative is not elbows up. It's the president took the gloves off and we turtled.
Yeah, the White House is framing this as a win, which, as we know, is very important to Mr. Trump. So if it is such significant revenue that's being, parked, for lack of better words, how come there's no public reaction? Where are Canadians on this?
It's a good question. It's a good question. I mean, I don't want to sound overly partisan, but a lot of this has been framed as, well, that was the previous government and we're a new government. Well, putting a Cadillac hood ornament on a Chev doesn't make it a Cadillac. Like, this is the same government. These were the same commitments with respect to tax revenues. In fact, the spending promises are even larger, and the deficit, therefore, will be even bigger. And that, I think, should garner more attention from the public. It certainly is from the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the Auditor General, and I think it would from Parliament, yet Parliament, as we know, is going to go into recess, and therefore it'll be a long, hot summer trying to figure out why taxes are still going up. I think this back and forth with the president is having a white noise effect on a lot of people. It's a new day, new threat, new tariff, but these have grave implications for the Canadian economy. And short of getting into the natural resource industry in a big way, and that means building pipelines and facilitating the export of LNG, the same I would say for critical minerals, we are in for a world of hurt in the Canadian economy come the fall.
Oh, one more point on this tax. Could this be a chess move? There is negotiations being done at a global level for some sort of tax on these companies. So could this just have been something they had in their pocket and they say, well, we're going to get that down the road anyway, we can offer this up?
Well, I would think that had it not been for the fact that this tax had been planned and placed there for 5 years. Other countries have done it, you're right. The UK, France, others, but let's be clear, the UK has at least the semblance of a deal with no tariffs. Other European countries may be in the queue, and once again, Canada has been made an example. And these aren't my words, it was leverage. This is coming from some of the trade representatives in the White House today. They were gloating about the fact that Canada had capitulated. So, I don't know what we're getting in return for backing off on this particular issue. And of real concern should be those in the dairy industry, the supply managed industries. What's next? We still have tariffs on aluminum, on steel. We're not in the best place in terms of being able to actually diversify our trading relationships, which has been talked about since before the election, quite frankly.
Well, supply management. Some would point out that perhaps the auto pack is at risk. Let me switch to the NATO spending and draw upon your experience as defense minister. Can Canada afford to spend 5% of GDP? I know it's a few years out. What's the work out to $150 billion a year? That's the first part of the question. And second is, every service in the armed forces will have a shopping list for that money to be used. As former defense minister, are there some obvious priorities there that need the spending first?
Yeah, let me preface this by saying I'm thrilled, like a lot of people, to hear a government prioritize and make that type of commitment very publicly to both Canadians, the Canadian Armed Forces first and foremost, and to our European allies. Can we do it in the time that's been laid out? Even getting to 2% within this calendar year is going to take some form of sacrifice somewhere else. That is to say, what are we cutting or what tax are we going to raise to get the sufficient revenues even to get to 2%, which is an increase of roughly $10 billion in the Canadian budget. To get to the $150 billion, which would bring us to 5%, even in 10 years, is a massive commitment, one that won't be performed by the current government if you're looking out 10 years. That one may be a bridge too far. You're already seeing some of the NATO countries that agreed to it hedging their bets. And the way that some of this will happen, Todd, to be very clear, is they're going to move $2.5 billion from the Coast Guard into the Canadian Forces. They're going to immediately increase some of the internal spending for salaries, pensions, investments in housing, on-base infrastructure, all good things, all necessary, but they won't increase operational readiness or increase our ability to deploy, or dare I use the word, our lethality. Big ticket items around finishing the contract on F-35s. We obviously will be in the business of getting submarines at some point. And the missile defense system, whether it's Golden Dome or some other form of having missile defense in the Canadian Arctic, those are all massive spending commitments. And so those items could get us there, but where we cut one end of the blanket to sew on the other end is going to be very interesting when the budget comes in the fall.
Peter MacKay, we always appreciate your take on these things. Thank you very much, and have a great Canada Day.
Thank you, Todd. Same to you and the listeners.
We'll take a break. We'll be back with more of your local news right after this.